So as Devin mentioned, my name is Tom. There we go. And I support the teams working on the React family of technologies at Facebook. Back in 2014, when React started to gain adoption, I fondly remember this conversation with one of the core team members at the time, Christopher Shadow. He said, Tomo, there are so many people using React right now, we have to put together a conference. But we didn't know the first thing about putting together a conference. And so with a ton of help, we actually made that first conference happen. At the first React Conf, we talked a bit about why React was working so well for us at Facebook. It made our code more predictable and easier to maintain, and engineers felt more productive when they were using it. We also introduced React Native to the world and the concept of learn once, write anywhere. One thing we didn't spend much time talking about, though, is what our long-term goal is. So that's what I want to talk about today. Our goal is to make it easier to build great user experiences, and we want those experiences to be able to be used by as many people in the world as possible. To be clear, great user experiences have existed since long before React, so we're not trying to make it possible to build them. We just want to make it a lot easier, because today I think it's just really hard. So let me explain what I actually mean by easier to build and by great user experiences. We usually refer to these things as developer experience and user experience, or UX and DX. When I talk about a great developer experience, I'm usually talking about a few things. First is something I'll call a low barrier to entry. You shouldn't need to learn a ton of stuff before you can start playing with some code and seeing what happens when you make changes to it. Next is developer productivity. You have to be able to make changes quickly and with confidence. And lastly, I'd say that it's really important that what you're building is able to scale as it grows in complexity or as your team grows in size. And when I talk about a great user experience, I'm usually talking about things like fast startup, responsive interactions and transitions, and an ability to work offline or in flaky networking conditions. Mobile has really raised the bar here, especially when it comes to performance and our expectations around responsiveness. But we'll come back to this in a bit, because I want to spend a little time talking about developer experience. And more specifically, I want to talk about this idea of a low barrier to entry, because it's something I've become pretty passionate about. I'm not going to try to convince you that React is super easy to learn and that anyone can pick it up in a few weeks. It introduces quite a few novel concepts, and it can be intimidating if you've never programmed before. I will say, however, that I believe React has a relatively low barrier to entry, especially compared to many other technologies or compared to computer science in general. I have this memory of showing up to my first computer science class my freshman year of college. The lecture hall was so full, I had nowhere to sit. There were students lining the aisles and standing up against the back wall. But I remember someone saying not to worry about it being so crowded or not having a seat, because half of these people will be gone soon anyway. And look, after a couple weeks, sure enough, it was. Half of the people dropped the course or dropped the major. And this didn't have anything to do with my school or my professor or the course. All of those things were fantastic. This happens all over the world because learning computer science is hard. It can take a long time for you to get to that fateful moment where it just clicks and you get hooked and you get sucked in. I was almost scared away from programming personally altogether because of algorithms I couldn't make sense of, confusing compiler errors, pointers, which I still think I don't understand. And this is one of the reasons the web has always been so great. Being able to make a change to an HTML file and immediately see the result of that change in the browser is a really powerful hook. It sparks your curiosity and makes you say, well, wait, what happens if I do this? So really quickly, I need a little audience participation. Raise your hand if HTML was your first programming language. Nice, a lot of you. Some of you are shaking your heads. If you refuse to raise your hand because HTML is not a programming language, like, come on. You know what I meant, okay? It's coding. You can see the output. It's a language. I think React is really similar to HTML in this sense. It doesn't necessarily make it easier to learn computer science, but because it's declarative and because you can tinker with your code and you can see the output very quickly, it keeps you engaged and it gets you excited to explore. Earlier this year, a coworker of mine named Christine Abernathy presented about React at an event in San Juan, Puerto Rico. It was an overview for beginners that provided getting started instructions and short demos of React, React Native, and React 360. She shared some quotes with me after that session, and I wanted to share some of them with you today. One person said, "I'm not a coder, but what you've shown has given me inspiration to start because it doesn't look that hard." And a non-CS professor said, "I know nothing about programming, but I could easily follow along and understand what was going on." Finally, one student who attended the session said, "I tried coding in the past and gave up. I'm a biology major, and I'm now excited about trying again and building a VR app like a museum app. Is that possible?" This is what I meant about sparking curiosity. These quotes exactly match my early experiences of sharing React with Facebook. Designers and engineers from very different technical backgrounds and experience levels could pick it up relatively easily, and they'd get hooked pretty quickly. Learning React does not mean you don't need to learn JavaScript or anything about the web. And learning React Native does not mean you don't need to learn iOS, Android, or Windows. What it means is that you don't need to develop a deep level of understanding of all of these things first. You can get started quickly, and over time, you can explore the strengths and beauty of each of these different platforms and environments when you're ready. Just like HTML and CSS, I think of React as a gateway technology. Again, I don't expect anyone to learn all the nuances of use effect and context providers on day one, but I do expect that they'll be able to get something on the screen quickly and that React will scale with them as they learn more and experiment. The React core team is also constantly reevaluating existing APIs and techniques to make sure that even as we add new features, we're keeping the barrier to entry as low as possible for those who have never used React and also for those who have never programmed before. When the team first told me they were going to introduce get-derived state from props, I half-jokingly asked, well, what life cycles are we getting rid of in order to make room for the new one? And to my delight, they shared that we're actually, in Facebook's code base at least, removing most common uses for 3 existing life cycles. So now, when a new developer opens a React code base for the first time, there's a chance that they might only come across 1 concept they need to learn instead of 3. But having a relatively low barrier to entry isn't the only thing I mentioned that contributes to a great developer experience. People also need to be able to iterate on whatever they're creating quickly and with confidence. When we get this right, React enables developers to get whatever they're building in front of real people really quickly. If it takes a long time to see the result of a change you made because of a slow compilation or build step, or if you can't figure out how to debug something and you're not presented with descriptive, actionable error messages right in front of your face, or if you spend all of your time fighting with tools rather than building your product, it's going to be really hard to create something exceptional that adds value to people's lives. This is why we've spent so much time working on projects like the React Dev Tools and Fast Refresh, which Brian Vaughn's going to be talking about tomorrow morning. And lastly, related to developer experience, it's important that after you've been building for a while, you don't hit a wall. React needs to be able to scale with you as your project grows in complexity and as your team grows in size. As an engineering manager, this is actually one of the things I like best about React since the beginning. Since it forces us to break our applications down into components, it allows people to more easily iterate on pieces of the application in isolation while keeping the contract with the rest of the overall system intact. This is one of the reasons we've been able to build sophisticated products over long periods of time without teams outgrowing or needing to abandon React. So I think this combination of, back one, I'll get there in a minute. So I think this combination of a relatively low barrier to entry, a focus on enabling engineers to be productive, and an ability to scale with you as your product grows in complexity and as your team grows in size is why React and React Native have gained so much adoption around the world. I don't have a great way of determining exactly how many people there are worldwide that use React, but I have some proxies for like a lower and an upper bound. In his excellent talk from JSConf EU this year, Laurie Voss shared a bunch of stats from NPM's 2019 JavaScript ecosystem survey, including that 63% of respondents are using React at least some or most of the time. There's like 11 million JavaScript developers in the world, so this is a pretty high upper bound. In the 2019 Stack Overflow developer survey, 1 in 4 respondents said that they use React in some capacity. And then for the lower bound, once in a while what I'll do is I'll open the Chrome DevTools page, which is almost at 2 million now. Sorry, having some problems with the clicker here. And React is being used to build software that does everything from reducing food waste, which Tanya is going to talk about later this morning, and promoting transparency in government spending, which Lizzie is going to talk about tomorrow. At this point, React is being used by millions of people worldwide, and the React community has probably become one of the largest software communities in history. But our goal has never been about adoption. And it's not about providing a great developer experience alone either. A great developer experience only matters if it's in service of delivering a great user experience. This is what React has always been about, making it easier to build great user experiences. So then, let's spend a little time talking about great user experiences. Over time, our definition of what constitutes a great user experience has changed quite a bit. We expect things to be fast, but as I said, native mobile applications have really raised the bar, especially when it comes to things like seamless transitions, fluid animations, responsive gestures, retained client state, and offline operation. React Native helps close the gap here a little because it brings some of the things that are great about the web from a developer experience standpoint to native mobile development, and it introduces what I think is a fundamentally more flexible architecture, while still embracing the things that are great about iOS and Android and Windows. We have a lot of work left to do to make sure that apps built with React Native are indistinguishable from platform-specific native apps, but we're making progress on that, especially with projects like Fabric and Turbo modules, and I have used plenty of incredible-feeling React Native applications. Web is a bit of a different story, though. The best way to make sure web apps start up fast and are universally accessible is to ship as little code as possible. When Alex Russell and the folks working on Chrome tell us that we need to stop shipping hundreds of kilobytes or even megabytes of JavaScript on our initial page loads, they're right. We need to find ways to stop incurring these heavy upfront costs whenever someone taps on a link. But in general, it requires a lot of code to be able to provide a user experience that can rival native applications. We need to find a way to strike the right balance. Now, progressive web apps and new features coming to evergreen browsers help get us quite a bit closer to where we need to be, but this is a really hard problem, and it's still far too difficult to deliver a really great user experience via web technologies alone. We've been collaborating with the Chrome team and other browser vendors to explore ways to make this better, but the React team has also been working on a couple of things that I think are going to help. In a few minutes, Yuzi is going to come up and do a deep dive on several projects that the team's been working on for the past year. But I wanted to give a quick overview of 2 in particular, which provide a pretty new foundation for React. Those are concurrent mode and suspense. First, about concurrent mode. CPUs just aren't getting faster like they used to. We basically made them as fast as we can within current physics constraints of heat and power consumption. And so the only thing we can do is really use more of them simultaneously. So this is why we need to find ways to parallelize and reprioritize work wherever possible. Native applications can do this with threads, but generally speaking, even in those environments, concurrency is really hard to get right. React Concurrent Mode is attempting to bring some of the benefits of concurrency to this massive ecosystem without forcing fundamental changes to the mental model for most developer experiences, or for most developers. It gives React the ability to interrupt big blocks of low-priority work in order to focus on higher-priority work, like responding to an interaction, and it can make a really big difference. And to my earlier point about needing to stop shipping so many resources on initial page load, we need to be able to lazily load as much as we can. It's currently really difficult to do this, though, and both user experience and developer experience can suffer if we do it wrong. I describe suspense as React's system for orchestrating the asynchronous loading of code, data, and resources, but that's a bit of a mouthful. So put more succinctly, suspense just lets components wait for something before they render. And it helps consolidate nested dependencies and nested spinners and things behind a single, simple loading experience. Projects like Concurrent Mode and Suspense give us new levers for building user experiences that feel great by default. These projects are hard and they take a long time because We can't just start from scratch with a bunch of new primitives and capabilities baked in. The React code we write today looks very different from the React code we wrote back in 2013. We have made some pretty fundamental changes, but we know that we always have to find an incremental path from where we are to where we want to be. I believe this work is worth doing because it can help close the gap between developer experience we love from web and the user experience we love from native mobile apps, making it easier to build user experiences that can reach as many people in the world as possible. Before I hand the stage over to Yuzi, there's one more thing I want to talk about, and it's the React community. As I mentioned earlier, this has probably become one of the largest software communities in history, but we have a lot of work to do. I had a pretty emotional couple of weeks back at the end of August. Over the past 10 years, I've learned that diverse teams build better products and make better decisions. Everyone working on React shares my conviction about this. But up until recently, we've taken a pretty passive stance to building and shaping the React community. We have a responsibility to you all, and I feel like we really let many of you down. We're committed to doing better. As a small first step, we've replaced React's code of conduct with the contributor covenant and have clarified its scope to cover both contributors and the community. The other thing I want to touch on is something I've been seeing more and more of lately. It seems like every time someone criticizes React on the internet, there's an angry mob of people that rise up to defend it. Look, many people think that React is pretty great. I am one of them. But React is far from perfect. And even if it was somehow perfect by some non-existent definition, it's never acceptable to disrespect or harass people who disagree with us. I want us to try harder to welcome criticism and to empathize with other perspectives. We have a lot to learn from frameworks like Angular, Ember, Preact, Svelte, Vue, and platforms like iOS, Android, and Windows. I sincerely hope none of us ever see the day when React is the only way to do things. As I mentioned earlier, I think React is a gateway technology, and it needs to be a gateway for everyone. React and the React community have created careers and opportunities for so many new people, but if we aren't being inclusive, those opportunities aren't available to everyone. Thanks.